A Pakistani company built from scratch, first generation entrepreneur, says no to a $200 million offer.
TCS is much more than a business to us. The value that we assigned to this company was far greater.
There was so much emotion built into the business. Why hand it over to professional management?
My father, although he did enlist the support of nephews and family members, etc., and so professional management has played a huge role in the growth of TCS.
Trucking, transport, trade.
Trucking sector is hugely fragmented, which again does not lend itself to efficiencies. Say 95% of your trucking is by owner operators that have, say, a maximum of 5 to 10 trucks in their fleet.
How does being a woman in this space in Pakistan play out?
Logistics is a predominantly, if not almost exclusively, male space. 9 times out of 10, I find myself in meetings where I would be the only woman in a room full of 15, 20, 30 men.
How does a family business survive from one generation to another? We have a lot of businesses that are state-driven businesses. We have a lot of businesses that are family businesses. And the biggest challenge is that family businesses do not survive that transition. But in today's Digitales, we're going to talk about a family business that is thriving under its transition. And it is a name that is a household name. TCS, the courier company. Saira Awan, the president, is here to talk to us about family business, about being a woman in logistics, and about the future of TCS. Check out this episode. Saira Awan, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Faizan?
I'm good. So I want to pick it up from an article that was published in 2019 in Profit that was a very salacious, like you said, article. And it said something that really popped to me. It said that Ijara Capital almost bought TCS for $200 million back in 2019. There was an offer on the table. And the deal was almost done with that existing management at the time, which was, I believe, a professional CEO was running the company at the time. And then on Saturday, the deal was verbally approved. Sunday, the day was spent with the family. And Monday, your father came and overturned that decision. I couldn't get through the rest of the article thinking to myself, how does someone say no? A Pakistani company built from scratch, first generation entrepreneur, says no to a $200 million offer. Walk me through that and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I think the answer to that question goes a little further back, obviously, from that weekend. And a lot of it plays into the overarching model of family businesses, if I may use that as a starting point, and I'll segue into this specific event. Family businesses, as you know, follow certain models. There is a model where there is a sole owner who is, maybe a founder calling all the shots. Whether it goes down further generations is, depends on the specific experiences of that family, all the way down to a distributed model of ownership where there are large numbers of, family members. There is also controlled ownership where there's a large number of family members, but decision making is limited by consensus, etc. I think it's very important first to lay out a little bit about the context for that decision that you are referring to. TCS is a family business which was set up by my father, and he and his older brother at the time, Brigadier Saira Awan, had a vision, and they were working together. They had a vision for a domestic logistics and courier company in Pakistan. This business grew organically. It was, it was always never really looked at external capital for growth. It grew because it followed market demand. And so from our flagship product is our core overnight delivery offering. And, we really linked up the entire country, the length and breadth of Pakistan from a delivery infrastructure perspective. And then off that base grew a number of related businesses. So I think the critical thing to remember about TCS is really the specifics of this particular entity. As I mentioned, it's always grown organically. It has a very entrepreneurial ethos, and that comes directly from my father. So, this is a business which really bears a very strong imprint of, I wouldn't even say the family, I would say specifically the owner, the founder, which is my father, the cultural values, and that is also linked to the purpose of the organization, right? And I think as a family business owner, one really has to think very hard, and we can go into further questions about management versus ownership, but how do you actually think about your business as a family member? Is it just there because your capital is invested in it and therefore it is a means of capital returns and supporting the income of the family? Or does it serve something deeper? Is it actually linked to your core purpose that you see? And actually, for us, it's always been more of the latter. It's a very emotive experience. It's been a very emotive experience. So TCS is much more than a business to us. It is actually defines in many ways our purpose, and also that's linked to the issue of succession, because very often in family businesses you don't have the second generation as passionate about the original purpose. In TCS we don't have that issue. We're very passionate about what it actually stands for. We get that directly from our father. And so when the issue came of sale or divestment, it was much more than the number that you've tabled. It was about, what do we see as our purpose? What do we see as our purpose, not just as the stewards of capital, but as the stewards of this business, which has 12,000 employees and 12,000 families have their livelihoods connected to it. It offers services which we see as integral to the economy of this country. We serve the length and breadth, as I mentioned, but also across the the different sectors of the economy. So are we ready emotionally, psychologically, to really part with this business that has been created, where value has been added, and say it is worth $200 million with a paycheck? And at that point in time, we, at least as the second generation, felt that the answer to that question was no. That the value that we assigned to this company was far greater than that monetary number. And also, we felt that what we as a second generation could add was actually we could see far greater growth, far more potential. And so we thought, let us take it to the next level. And divestment is always an option for any business. Right? Whether it's partial, whether it's full, nobody's putting that off the table. But at that particular point in time, because you referenced a particular weekend, it was more of an evaluation of where does value lie for us. And we really wanted to sort of roll up our sleeves, get into it, and add to the value of that. Furthermore, there were some other angles as well, which were when we really understood, if private equity comes into a business that has very painstakingly, with a lot of love and blood, sweat and tears been, as I mentioned, it's grown to a certain level, we have very close emotional links to our employees. When you hand it over to private equity, obviously you have to be prepared for the core essence of that business to be changed, fundamentally altered. There's going to be a certain slicing and dicing. Are we running the most efficient operation? Probably not. And so they may come and they may make it a more profitable entity, but will it lose its core essence, and how will that feel for us as the family that has seen it through 4 decades of its growth?
Comprehensive answer. But let me ask you this then. If that was the case, and if there was so much emotion built into the business, right? And it's 4 decades into the making, first generation entrepreneurs still involved in the business. Why hand it over to professional management? Because one of the things that I'm noticing, especially in Pakistan, is there's a struggle now with family businesses in how they need to proceed. Part of it is the economic situation. The younger generation does not want to stay on here and run that family business. Part of it is the point that you mentioned, is that maybe the values the way they were built into TCS may not exist in other family businesses. And the other part of the reason is there's actually no formal, proper thinking around families passing on the baton because, I mean, our country is what, 77 years old? There was a whole nationalization segment that took place in the 70s. So really the businesses that are big enough to be passed on are going through that pain right now. Your business, your family business was one of them. Why hand it over to professional management in the mid 2010s if there was such, sort of closeness to it?
Right. I think there's definitely a role for professional management. We can talk generally, and then I'll talk specifically about TCS as well. As you mentioned, in every family, you don't necessarily have a second generation, whether it's a second or the third generation, as the case may be, ready to take the baton and say, look, I'm going to run with it and, have that same ethos of growth, etc. So there's usually just there's limiting factors, right? Who is going to be the next leader? Do they really believe in the business? Are they willing to invest in Pakistan? I mean, both in an actual sense, are they willing to live and raise their families in Pakistan? Are they as committed to the business? So there's that limiting factor. And also, there's a greater limiting factor, which is the family necessarily the best place to do they actually have within them? They may have the passion. Do they have the expertise? And that may not always be
True.
Within the family. So I think there's a very important role for professional management. In our case, the start of the business, as I mentioned, between my father and his older brother, they had a vision. They worked together. At some point, they decided to very sort of in a very consensual manner, they separated their business interests. My father, took over TCS and really, ran with his vision. But again, my father, although he did enlist the support of nephews and family members, etc., he did realize that as the business was growing, it was scaling up very rapidly. You needed good quality people. And so professional management has played a huge role in the growth of TCS. And I think one of the things we're really proud of, actually, it's one company which, although family owned, this idea of the glass ceiling is not really present in TCS, because even our current CEO, our group CEO, is somebody who started life as a courier. Our chief operating officer started life as a courier.
Wow.
Our regional head started life as a courier, right at that operational front line. So the company has really allowed for the growth of good quality talent to move up, because there was need for talent and there was need for that managerial expertise. And they were sort of trained within the ethos of the company, and so that's invaluable.
Right.
They have really helped in the growth of the company. So I think for us, for TCS, really the misalignment with professional management happened when professional management came from outside the logistics space. And in 2014, we did have professional management that came in, very good qualified people.
But they came from the banking sector.
They came from the banking sector.
But why would... So that was a big question for me. Why from the
Yeah.
banking? Because it's so different. Banking
Yeah.
is professional services, suited,
Yes.
booted. Logistics is just dark and
Yeah,
dungy,
yeah, absolutely. And so that led to a certain misalignment. So I wouldn't sort of use a broad brush and say professional management has worked or hasn't worked. I think it has worked spectacularly well in our company. I think if the professional management, again, personal opinion, when it rises through the ranks and is familiar with the culture of the company, the ethos, and its own spirit, its DNA, those professional managers tend to make decisions that are better aligned with shareholder values, founder's vision. If they are transplanted from outside, they tend not to last too long within TCS. And so, I think it's, I hope that answers the question, but I think professional management is very important. The other thing I just want to mention is that it also depends on, as the shareholder or the shareholding entity, in this case, it was largely my father. He has a work style which is, he gives a lot of autonomy to people, right? Now, when you give, in a sector, in a company that already has growth momentum, when you give people autonomy, there's an entrepreneurial spirit, magic happens. And it did. By the time the second generation comes around, you have a little bit of a sense of there's a certain amount of unchecked growth, scale can come back to actually, haunt you in certain ways. So you need to, as a second generation, perhaps, and this is again, I'm speaking more from my own personal experience, you start looking at autonomy versus accountability, and you start really thinking more on the accountability. How do I put corporate governance in place so that whilst professional management is empowered, there is more oversight, perhaps, so that we don't have massive misallocations of capital which are not aligned with the overall vision.
Why pick a team from the banking sector to come into logistics? Why did that happen? Why was there? I can understand that perhaps at that time there weren't enough professional managers in logistics because maybe there was a couple of international players, there was smaller local players. A lot of them came from TCS in itself. But why banking? I mean, you could have picked any sector.
Yeah. Again, that's a very specific instance. It wasn't like there was a thought process that we need to get people from banking per se. It's just that at that time, the person who happened to be selected by my father for his own reasons at that point in time happened to be from the banking sector, and he brought with him a team that was largely banking sector. Also, if I may, I think that when you talk about consumer banking and you talk about, the spread of services across different sectors of the economy, arguably there is a certain degree of conceptual overlap between a business of our nature and we look at, for example, our footprint across the country. It's not as extensive as some of the banks, but we tend to service almost every bank branch. So there is a certain synergy between banking and logistics. And so, this mindset of serving the consumer, the Pakistani consumer, was very much part of the thinking, in addition to a certain thinking at that time in terms of the model of branchless banking that also
Right.
played into the model at the time.
And that's when e-commerce was just picking up. 3G, 4G services had just come out in Pakistan in 2014.
Yes.
Sort of things were on the up and up when it came to sort of digitizing and e-commerce and all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So the question then it takes the question that comes to mind next is when you do bring in professional management, right? And let's say you are a family business and you've been around for a while, and you bring in professional management and you found someone from the right sector with the right experience and so on. There are examples globally where you give some sort of an equity ownership earn-out structure, right? Where over a 3-4 year period, your shares can vest and you're a part owner of that company as well. Does that model work in Pakistan?
I think there's no reason why that model shouldn't work. We tried a different model. I think that the jury is still out on which is the best model. I personally do believe that management can be very effectively incentivized, with sort of ESOPs and equity plans. Remember, in my previous life, I was also a corporate lawyer and spent a great deal of time really looking at M&A transactions where ESOPs are put into place as a big incentivizing force. I've seen that work very effectively in the West. Have I really seen it? I don't have a specific example where it's worked in Pakistan. I've also been very just focused on our own dynamics, so I haven't explored this.
Right.
At some point, I think the short answer is yes. I think there's no reason why it cannot. In our business, at this particular point in time, we're following a slightly different model. I think management, but management does need to be incentivized.
What's the model you're following?
Well, our model at this point in time is that we as shareholders, particularly as second generation, are just much more involved in the business. As I mentioned, my father had a model of, a lot of autonomy that also led to a lot of growth. But as the second generation now, with my father as the chairman of the board, we're still very much driving his vision. But I am very, very involved in the day-to-day decision-making of the company, along with our professional management team. And I think for the time being, that is working well. I think I was discussing this actually with my father recently, and his view, which I do believe is correct, is that businesses need to achieve a certain level of stability and a certain level of maturity before you can fully hand over to professional management. Now, what is that maturity? You need to have, sort of balance sheet strength, all the way down to market share, to strong brand. Once you have that, and the ethos is very strongly embedded in the company, and the cultural values are very clearly defined, I think at that time it is possible. But when things are a little bit in flux, there is a danger that handing over too much control to professional management can derail your vision. So at this time, we are very hands-on.
Have you seen, and so that means that the ownership interests remain within the family?
Correct. Yes.
Have you seen an example in Pakistan, or have you come across any that have demonstrated success in handing over a family business to professional management with an ownership interest?
Off the top of my head, I mean, can you think of any?
I couldn't. That's why I asked.
Yeah, I mean, where you've completely handed over to professional management.
Where you're sitting back as a shareholder and you're just, maybe serving on the board.
I cannot. I think that, in fact, quite the opposite. I think Pakistani businesses tend to be very micromanaged by the family. Now, whatever model of management they follow,
Right.
whether it's one leader and other family members are on the board, whether you have many family members in management positions, those models of course differ. But yahan pe there's a very strong sense that in fact, it's the family members who should be signing every single check, and giving up control is actually seen as a dilution of power, and God forbid you do that. So I think, but there are some very compelling reasons why that is not the model that should be followed, depending on, as I mentioned, the maturity level of the business, etc. So यहाँ पे तो state-run model भी है, which again has demonstrated success. We are not a state-run business, but we're kind of a hybrid. We're trying to, we do have professional management, we rely on professional management, but owing to the lessons from the past, I wouldn't necessarily say mistakes of the past, because every company has its own journey, but you do incorporate certain lessons, and there is a difference between generation to generation. So at this time, our thinking is we do want to be more rather than less involved as owners.
Why do you think the state-run model works here? I mean, India has had a state-run model. It's South Asia, let's say. South Asia.
Yeah.
I would even include the Middle East for, now
Yes.
I've started getting some more exposure to the Middle East. I think it's the same mindset over there.
Yeah.
So I would say it's this belt, MENA. I would say MENA as a belt, including South Asia. Why do you think?
Even in East Asia, you've got some very successful businesses that are run by, you look at Korea, a lot of examples, very strong family control.
But it's not like this in the West. West has moved towards more of the sort of, list the company, have private equity, professional management.
Yes.
You keep your management stake, you get your dividends.
Yes.
Why do you think that the micromanaging state mindset?
I think corporate governance models, I think the training of professional management is something that we are still in the formative phases of. We've got some excellent business schools here now, but you certainly have a generation of professional managers that has been trained, but I don't think we have that depth of experience or expertise yet where families feel that they can really entrust their capital, their vision, their growth strategies to professional managers. And also, I think again it goes to one of the points that I raised earlier, that you can have somebody who is even has experience, say, in other businesses, etc. What I find is that true success comes when professional management fully understands and incorporates the shareholder's vision, right? So it's not a case of the shareholder sort of taking a back seat, but shareholders, as you know, whether you call them, controlling families, are so involved in what they want out of the business that unless there is that alignment, and it's the people who are not necessarily professional managers on paper, but people who have experience working within that system. I mean, at TCS, we like to say there's something called the TCS way. And it's really people who've spent a certain amount of time in the business who understand how things work. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. I'm not saying necessarily sometimes it really helps to have a fresh pair of eyes, bring in talent from outside, have them look at the business, point out deficiencies, great value in that. And I hope at some point, we move more and more towards that model. That's where corporate governance really works. That's where you can get external talent in. But again, for the time being, we're a little skewed more towards more control, more people who've risen within the system, rather than people who've come from the outside and who've necessarily succeeded within this setup.
And tell me about corporate governance. You brought that up a couple of times. For me, I think the answer lies in corporate governance more than
Yes.
professional management, because at the end of the day, like you've got the TCS way, you can train people to operate in your business the way you want them to operate, be it on the value
Yeah.
system, be it on the outputs, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So to me, if the business schools are lacking, fine, they're lacking. It is what it is. We'll train them.
Yeah.
The corporate governance is where there's a major issue.
Yes.
You had exposure overseas. You worked as a corporate lawyer. You saw corporate governance. Tell me about what is missing here in corporate governance specifically that existed for companies in the West. Maybe the top 3 things that are missing that if we introduce this, we'll be able to move to that model.
Absolutely correct. I think corporate governance is the key. It's the system of accountability, but also empowerment that enables growth to take place with the right talent, which may or may not be a member of the family or the owner himself or his daughter or his son, right? So how do you create that system? Corporate governance, the entire system of corporate governance, of course, you put in place the shareholders, define, as I mentioned earlier, the vision, where do they want the company to go. I think the missing link, perhaps, arguably, is having truly effective boards which have enough independent representation to really bring in the outside in perspective, to be a check on decision making, and then to have that oversight over management, which is then clear in terms of what they have to deliver, but they drive the strategy. And then, of course, in a family setup, you have the family as a sort of a guiding almost presence in terms of values, etc., across all 3 layers. So until and unless there is clear definition and there is clear, these 3 layers are very clearly demarcated and defined, and the leadership, who is actually calling the shots. I think a lot of times that can get complicated. Is it the chairman of the board who's calling the shots? Is it the second generation, leader of the board, or whatever. Chairman of the board, of course, has the overarching control, oversight, etc. But is this the CEO? So you need to have empowered CEOs, absolutely. Again, if it's from somebody from within the family. In other words, corporate governance is such it's such an integral prerequisite to growth and success. But the devil is in the detail, and it's not a one model fits all. Every company really has to sit and think about the model of corporate governance that works for them. And once you've defined that and articulated that, and there's clarity and there's communication, and leadership is, defined, who is taking which decision at what level, I think that can go a long way in terms of unleashing then the potential of your management as well. Otherwise, management tends to feel very constrained. They often feel that they have their hands tied behind their backs because at the end of the day, it's not them that's calling the shots in decision making. So this move away from a SATE mindset where at the end of the day, the CEO can say, if it's a professional CEO, you really need to empower the professional CEO. Otherwise, if it's the SATE so-called is taking all the decisions, then ultimately you have somebody who's simply your
yes man.
manager, a yes man. Do you really want that? So it plays to a lot of different parts of the growth of the company. Which stage is the company at? As it matures, I think you need to go more and more towards that effective corporate governance model. The board plays a very important role.
So this brings me to 2 further questions. So first, I'm going to touch on boards, and then second, I'm going to come on to recourse, right? A recourse in terms of accountability. So on boards, what size of business do you think should have a board if there's a family business? I mean, is it 100 million rupee business doing 10 crores of revenue, should they have a board? Is it a business that does 1 billion rupees? Should that have a board? Is there a size before you put a board in place? Because board is effectively a group of people who's advising you on how to run the business, who have independence to guide you, advise you, and whose advice you should take.
Yes.
Right? If you're going to
Yes.
put a board in place and just be like, whatever, let's have a cup of tea once every quarter, and I'll give you a stipend, just show up and sign the whatever.
Yeah.
What's the point? So what size of business does it need to be?
Look, I don't think there's a magic number, but again, as we know, when a business is growing, when it starts, okay, the founder is the be all and end all. He calls the shots. He's running a tight ship, a team that is directly getting their instructions from the founder, CEO, right? And that's how businesses grow. It's when you reach, now the question is, what is that scale, right? I think, again, it varies for different businesses, but you certainly reach a certain point, and a business will be aware of the point, when the scale, your success, you kind of become a victim of your own success, because you then have to figure out, how do I delegate effectively? I cannot be everywhere. So I still need people to drive my vision forward. And so then you start putting in place the building blocks of corporate governance. You have to, an owner who is driving the business cannot have 15 people reporting to him, right? You need to have systems of accountability, structures of control and governance put in place as the business grows. And as there's momentum for growth, you have to, start giving up some of your, you have to delegate more effectively. The more you delegate, the more important corporate governance becomes. And so I think that is really, is that too vague an answer? I mean, I think there's no real one tipping point. I mean, I don't know if you have a tipping point in mind, but I think when the business reaches a point where decision-making can be compromised because it's only concentrated in one person, you do need to
that's a good way to look at it. I like that.
Understand at what point the interest of, at one point, the interest of the organization almost supersedes perhaps a more narrowly defined interest of the founder. Maybe the organization outgrows the original vision, then you have to put in place, systems of actually figuring out, how do you manage growth? How do you actually, keep up? And there are times when, even founders, if it's a family structure, people have been sidelined because their vision maybe was too narrow for where the company has reached. Right? Businesses sometimes, get exponential growth, see exponential growth. And so there's no real one answer. I think in a lot of these issues with companies, like families, are dynamic, organic, living, breathing beings, right? And so there's no one size fits all. You can be guided by certain overarching principles, I think, at best.
So I think that, to your point, there's two, I mean, as you say it comes to life. There's 2 points when a business would need a board. One, when the founder or CEO is so overburdened with the decision making that's going to slow things down, that they need to outsource some of the thinking to smarter people who are sitting in a room and saying, hey, listen, there's this great idea I have. I want to throw it out to you guys. Absolutely. Tell me what you think. Here's how I'm leaning. And then I'll go do this other thing in the meantime while you guys think it through.
Yes.
I think that's the first part. So whatever that scale is, whether it's 100 million, whether it's 1 billion, well, maybe it's 10 million. Who cares, right? It could be 3 of your best friends that just sit in a room and say, hey, you know what? We'll be your board of advisors. Yeah. I think the second time is when there is a period when, even founders and CEOs exhaust, right? After a while, there's fatigue.
Yes.
Because, if you've done this for 10, 15 years and you're carrying that burden and you've been carrying it, and after a while, you still want to carry it, but now you need to share the burden.
Yes.
So it's not about speed or agility. It's just that you've carried it for so long.
Faizan, that's a really interesting point. And I think it's very relevant in the context of all businesses, but particularly in family businesses. We're talking about actual human beings. We're talking about people with limited fatigue thresholds and limited energy levels and age. I mean, age becomes a factor, right? Yeah. You can have a founder who may actually reach a threshold of, where their physical capacity is diminished just because they are getting older. So you do need to, at some point, inject for the sake of the longevity and the sustainability of that enterprise, you need to have an effective corporate governance structure because they may not have the ability. They may have all the good intentions, all the expertise and the thinking, but they do need that additional support. So really, at best, the corporate governance framework is the single most enabling factor for the growth of a business and for ensuring the sustainability of a business. Because here you are almost trying to retain the essence in some businesses. That's really important. What is the essence of the business? And you don't want to compromise on scale, but you recognize the very human limitations of the actors involved, right? And again, in family businesses, some family businesses have, tens of members involved, and you can always think of replacements. If this person backs out, then this person steps in. In some businesses, you don't have that many people. I mean, in our company, it's my father and it's me and my brother. It's not a big group. So, are we constrained? Absolutely. And whilst I know my father's vision is the overriding vision for the business, we would love and we do seek, we have a board of advisors and we like to get external guidance and an external perspective on things which could be blind spots for us as well. Because again, the world of the family is very emotive and emotion-based largely, and the world of business is very rational. It has to be. And so when you marry the two, you really need to have, sometimes you need that external sort of structure to guide that
connection between the two.
Yeah.
The second point I was bringing up was around recourse, right? And so the concept of recourse to me is very loose in Pakistan. Like if I lose money in my business or someone takes a bad decision or steals or a vendor, gives me faulty product, I mean, what recourse do I have? I'll go to court.
Yeah.
There's no Better Business Bureau. Court's going to take 15 years to take a decision, and that too most likely is going to be paid off by the person who is, the corrupt individual in the case. So what is my recourse? My recourse is that I do business with people I trust. Who are the people I trust the most? Well, it starts with family. And then obviously there's, let's say, professional communities that you're part of, the value systems are aligned. So especially in countries like ours where the law of the land, the rule of law is weak.
Yeah.
There is little recourse. And so when there is little recourse, you're inclined towards having more and more people where there is inherent trust.
Yes.
Or there is a given level of trust. I mean, family members also do things that are crazy, but that's why you have the family members in play, and the Sate is more involved because the Sate feels that if it's not me, if it's not my skin in the game, any one of these guys can mess up and I have no recourse, right? It's my blood, sweat and tears on the line. And then in some cases, it's my vision, my ethos, my belief. The business is an extension of me as a person. I am the business, the business is me.
Yes, absolutely.
And so if you take from that, you're taking from me. So I have to be involved. Would that change if the law of the land, the rule of law was actually in place? Because that's the case in Western markets where rule of law allows you to get back some, if not all of what you lose.
Absolutely, 100% correct. The rule of law plays such a critical role. And here when we talk even about, say, minority shareholder rights, and we talk about, this ability for a minority investor, why are businesses, why is capital and wealth concentrated within, these family? Because minority shareholders, who wants to put in their capital where it's not guaranteed in terms of security, etc. So you're absolutely right. I think, of course, having an effective law and order mechanism and infrastructure and system engenders more trust and the ability to take risks by people who have capital to invest. They would be more willing to do that. But your point is really significant. And I think that this idea of trust goes beyond. So you see, it touches upon every angle. Let's look at the multiple stakeholders, right? You mentioned the Better Business Bureau, right? Now, as a customer, I mean, there are consumer protection laws all over the world. As a consumer where you are dealing with, say, a TCS, right? You really want to be dealing with an ethical company on the other side, or at least what you perceive to be an ethical business, because your capital, your money, etc., is at stake. And so as a customer, that level of trust is important. When you look at employees as well, they look at they look at who they're working for. It's a very personal, often relationship or a personal, you work for a certain family. That trust also is important for that stakeholder group. And I think that providers of capital, absolutely. This idea of trust is so significant that you're absolutely right to say that very often businesses become extensions of the family name. People are actually going more on
Right.
which family are you dealing with, or
Correct.
which founder, is that person trustworthy? It's almost their personal reputational capital that becomes the currency with which you kind of pull stakeholders towards you. And so I think that the law and order, because so what is recourse? I think in Pakistan it is definitely a problematic space. You can run, court cases don't get resolved in time.
True.
So ultimately, it just comes down to personal relationships, and absolutely, it's a big. I think if our court system, if our overall legal framework becomes more robust in terms of protecting the different stakeholders, it absolutely will be a huge enabling factor.
Yet at the same
And
time,
it exists in the West, like you said. Yeah.
But the thing is, what's ironic is at the same time, this is the very country where there's an entire trade taking place, the trucking, transport trade, and I'm sure you know about this, that exists in KPK, and all the business that's done in KPK is done on the concept of Zaban. Zaban de di, sab ho gaya. I've done business with these guys. I regularly do business. We have a small honey business and we procure honey from, and there's no contract.
Yeah.
I know what he's going to send me is going to be what he says he's going to send me.
Yeah.
And he knows I'm going to send him a payment in time.
But that's not a scalable model, first of all. And
they're doing it.
They're doing it, of course.
At a large volume.
Yes, but that doesn't serve the overall interest of the economy, because you mentioned trucking particularly. So that trucking sector is hugely fragmented, and which again does not lend itself to efficiencies. It's very inefficient. It's very fragmented. It's largely undocumented because it's so fragmented. It's totally out of the tax net. So you have say 95% of your trucking is by owner operators that have say a maximum of 5 to 10 trucks in their fleet.
Correct.
Right? Now there's a lot of inefficiencies in that system. काम आपका जरूर हो जाएगा, ज़बान पे होगा, you'll get whatever. But when we look at scalable models, you do need to create systems to bring some sort of efficiencies and order in that whole fragmented space. So that's something that I speak a lot about in different forums where we talk about trucking and we talk about the overall inefficiencies in logistics in Pakistan in every sector, whether it's so logistics covers sort of land, sea, air, and rail. And we see inefficiencies in all four.
Right.
Right. And right now, because rail is so inefficient, sea, let's park for the time being. Air, as we know, has its own costs, and so when we focus on land and the land routes, there's a lot of it's not, the logistics sector is really in need of this sort of as I said, to create that efficiency. But to do that, you need more professional players who have the capacity to scale, and also, as I mentioned, you do need regularized players for the sake of the overall economic growth of the country too. You cannot have a system of just fragmented.
But there are a number of startups that have tried to resolve this problem, right? And so, especially around the fragmentation of trucking, delivery, whatever it is, and a lot of startups have gotten funding, but none of them seem to be making a dent in solving this problem. Why do you think that is?
Which particular problem do you want me to look at?
Let's just talk about let's talk about trucking. There's startups out there that are trying to organize trucking where you create an app that allows you to book a certain amount of freight space on whatever transport that's moving up and down. There's transport carriers that carry vehicles up country, completely full, charge a different rate, come back down empty.
Yeah.
right? There's no efficiency in the way transport moves around Pakistan.
Yeah.
That is run by a mafia,
Yes.
right? That mafia
Yes.
is the mafia that killed the railway of Pakistan
Yeah.
and continues to ensure that the railway doesn't work. Railway only works when railway has cargo because it subsidizes the passengers. So there's startups that are out there that are trying to solve this problem, yet none of them have dented the surface or even taken sizable steps forward. Why do you think that is? Is this a problem that can never be solved in Pakistan? Efficiency in land transportation and logistics?
No, this is a problem that very much needs to be solved. I think you need active government support for this. What the startups are trying to do essentially is that they are trying to look at the existing system as it is, which I mentioned is very fragmented, and these small owner operator fleets. Look, the issue is that even when you look at a small owner operator, right, their fleets are not the most, they don't comply with axle load requirements. Are these people really investing in, energy efficient fleets? Are they really, I mean, there's huge amounts of highway damage that ensues because you've got those, 25 saal ke Bedford trucks that are going up and down. So who are we trying to make efficient, right? If you're looking at the existing state of play and we say, okay, we're just going to get them onto an Uberized model, I think, yes, that will lead to some sort of efficiencies because you will be essentially connecting, the demand and the supply in a more efficient way. But that is not the key problem to be solved. I think the trucking sector needs to be looked at from an industry perspective by the government, from a regulatory perspective in terms of, really, as I mentioned, compliance is a big issue. Taxation, how do you actually create, incentivize these owner operators to develop models? Maybe there's going to be consolidation in the sector and that will lead to, initially further growth. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that the reason why the startup model may arguably not have achieved as much success at this time is because the state of play at this time is still, the fundamentals are still flawed. And technology will be an enabling factor when we fix some of those fundamentals.
But no one would be incentivized to invest in trucking because the end consumer would not be able to or be willing to pay the incremental price that would be involved in upscaling the trucking space, right? And at the end of the day, mera kya ja raha hai? As long as my parcel reaches there in 5,000
rupees. So Faizan,
rupees.
that is the problem, and you've just highlighted it, right? Because this is a very capital intensive space. Now, if we are making those investments in our fleet and we are being compliant and energy efficient, etc., ticking all the boxes, yes, there is a cost to it. Now, who's going to bear that cost? That cost has to be passed on. That is when you actually see efficiencies and growth come in. If the end consumer is so used to a very basic model, and if the end consumer prefers a model where there's uninsured goods going in, non-compliant trucks up and down the country, is that really the model? If that's what the end consumer is willing to pay for, and we're saying we're not willing to pay more, because then obviously the model is going to stay static. Yes, it needs investment. Perhaps it needs to be repriced because the investment has to come in. But then hopefully at the end of the day, you're going to get those efficiencies in other ways because you will have a more regularized, efficient, sustainable supply chain, which doesn't exist at the moment.
True.
So it's a bit of a catch-22. I mean, if we're only going to say that we're going to pay the truck adda wala X rupees, I'm not going to pay TCS a higher price, then you are also accepting a lower standard of service. Right?
But that's all I can afford to pay. What if that's all I can afford to pay? What if that premium that, let's say, a company like TCS charges is not a premium I'm willing to pay, when I know that there's a 99% likelihood that vessel movers or the equivalent thereof will sell a space at the bottom of their bus and I can stick my whatever I need to stick.
But our starting point was that our supply chains are inefficient and they are costly because they are inefficient and they are non-compliant and they are not sustainable. And so, at some point, so we are, for example, looking to make, a lot of investments in our fleet. We already have made investments in our fleet, right? And we like to think that we offer, a better service because your goods are more secure. And ultimately, if you see the value proposition and you're willing to pay for the value proposition, then obviously
Right.
that is the model in which. But if I mean, it's a little bit of a circular
Yeah.
argument, so I'm not going to belabor the point.
Yeah, I
But
get it.
I think it depends on which level of the value chain you are willing to inject yourself as the consumer of those services. If you're happy for the truck adda to carry your maal, आपको कोई उसकी tracking नहीं है, आपको कोई visibility नहीं है, उसकी कोई insurance नहीं है, that's your call. Then you're paying for that. But
Right.
I think that there are enough players, and with the growth of the economy, which is what we're hoping to see, and if we're looking at export-led growth, and if we're looking at more logistics movement across the country, then you do need to move people and suppliers and into customers into a space where they pay for a more efficient delivery model.
So where in the value chain do you think, or do you see your business investing in that turns it not from a $200 million business, but let's say $1 billion valuation over the next 10 years?
In many ways I can answer this question. So one of the greatest strengths that I see as far as TCS is concerned, we are very connected to the grassroots of in this country, grassroots of the economy. We service businesses, a number of very small to SMEs, all the way around, to the big corporates in pharma and textile, etc. So we feel that because we are so connected, and then of course our big, what we call retail or consumer base, households, individuals, housewives, students, women entrepreneurs, etc. So we see ourselves so closely integrated with that grassroots economy of this country that we think there is great resilience in that model. That has been proven over 4 decades of all sorts of change that have happened in the political economic landscape. And so when we talk about value addition and where we see the growth, we think that our fundamental model is very strong. Off the back of this, we are able to offer a number of services because we are already connected with millions on a daily basis. We're connected, as I mentioned, with bank branches and daily households, and we are making e-commerce, etc. So there's a lot of touch points with the end consumer. As you know, in the startup model as well, the whole customer acquisition cost is a big metric for how many customers has a business acquired. So we think that because we have multiple customer touch points, both in terms of our couriers who are going and picking and delivering parcels and documents, to our infrastructure of 950 physical offices across the country, we think that everywhere there is commerce in Pakistan, you will find a TCS outlet. So off the back of that, we have a very ambitious growth agenda. And, which already, for example, and a lot of people are not aware of the number of verticals that TCS already is in. So in addition to, pure courier, which is our flagship product, parcels and documents, we also, we have a growing warehousing business. We've just doubled our warehousing footprint. Warehousing leads to, a distribution model. We do visa facilitation, gift delivery, home moving, we've got a fashion-focused e-commerce site. And so really, TCS is a business which, I don't want to sound too optimistic because, of course, one has to keep one's own ambition in check as well. But we think that how do we get from the 200 to the 1 billion? If we really play our cards right and there's a great responsibility on us, I feel as a second generation leader, if we can really understand and unleash, tap into the true potential of this company, it has a lot of potential to grow in all of these verticals that I've just mentioned. And regional trade is another one. We are working very actively to expand the trade routes, trucking, aviation, etc. So we would love for TCS to be, to take its growth model beyond our borders. My father always says that, Pakistani companies, we should develop local champions and really have them become sort of multinationals. We are already present in the UK, in the UAE. We've got an office in Tashkent. So why can we not be a regional and a global player? And of course, there are a few successful Pakistani businesses that have already taken that foray into the global space, at least in the regional space, and hats off to them. But we hope that we can do that. And off the back of such ambition and such growth, valuation comes. Again, valuation is not the driver of our, personal, we're really driven by the purpose of this company and what we see as its real core mission, which is to be the logistics backbone of Pakistan. And also part of our growth strategy will be a number of collaborations with, international players, where we feel the need. So it's not an insular model that we think that we as the family will carry this growth forward. Absolutely not. Where we see that there's a limitation, whether it's in terms of growth capital coming in, whether it's in the form of, getting really good quality talent. We believe in empowering our people. Hopefully that's going to lead to its growth.
And how does being a woman in this space in Pakistan play out? Because there's a lot of sectors that are dominated by men, right?
Yes.
Some people can say that private equity, banking, some people can say that oil and gas. But why I bring this up, and I hate bringing up this whole gender difference question, but this is important because in Pakistan, logistics is a very, very hardcore man's space because it involves on-ground labor, authorities, all the authorities, the various checkpoints that you have to, I'm going to use the word navigate because it's more politically correct, navigate through to get your products delivered. And all that entire space is dominated by men in this country.
Yeah.
Region, I can say maybe it's different. In the West is maybe a little bit more balanced, but how does a woman play a role in that? And is it a challenge, and how do you overcome that?
I've never felt personally, or I've never been made to feel while I was growing up or in my formative work experiences either. I guess I was fortunate in that. Being a woman was never something that I was conscious of as a limiting factor for me, for my personal professional development. Always had, a father, parents who've always believed in me, a husband who's always believed in me. And so I think that in terms of being a woman where I see myself now, it's more, how do I see myself as a leader? Am I an effective leader? Do I have the necessary leadership skills? Weighs more on me than, being a woman necessarily is not at the forefront of my consciousness on a daily basis. Having said that, you are absolutely right. Logistics is a predominantly, if not almost exclusively, male space. 9 times out of 10, I find myself in meetings, whether it's with customers or internally, where I would be the only woman in a room full of 15, 20, 30 men. I am gender agnostic as far as the issue of competence. So I always gauge people not so much as whether they are male or female, but as to whether they are, if it's a competent person. So I like to, when I focus inward on myself, I always check myself to see, am I competent? Am I the right person who's making these decisions? And so...
But that's not how our society operates.
That's not, yeah. I mean, again, I'm just sharing my personal experience. I started life as a corporate lawyer, and it was a very conscious decision to not actually be part of the family business. I've grown up with hearing of the family business, almost part of your core wiring growing up, which kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage as a second generation, family business leader. But, I wanted to create space for myself to really develop professionally outside the business space. So I worked as a corporate corporate lawyer, in the UK. And I think both in terms of my own confidence, my own experience, by the time I came into the business, I realized I had a lot to learn, right? So there's a certain degree of humility also that you come in thinking, oh, I don't know everything, I have to learn. And so I then supplemented my own knowledge or experience with an MBA. I thought that would equip me. But ultimately, my learning has come from really the hands-on work that I have gained, in the company. How has being a woman changed any of that? I think, as I mentioned, little basic principles. You need to have women in decision making. I think it's a proven fact that women, you need to have a balanced view across the table. So, I've tried very hard to recruit women into senior roles. But as I said, because I'm gender agnostic on the issue of competence, I would not just hire a woman just because she's a woman, obviously. But if there are two people who are of equal competence, I will, to create that sort of parity, give weight to the woman, because I think that that's an interesting perspective to bring in. We currently have about 6% of our workforce at TCS that is female, very, very low. We need to improve that. Logistics, a lot of women don't choose to enter logistics. Predominantly, women enter TCS more on the, customer service side. Call center agents are women. Some of our retail staff are women. We're now trying to get women as couriers, onto the in the field force. But there are real challenges, cultural, real sort of security related issues. Do you really want a woman carrying these, and so you're right, navigating those spaces tends to be more of a man's job, just the way things are. And it's not just in Pakistan. Logistics globally is a male dominated space. So, bringing it back to me, I think being a woman is... I think perhaps my perspective is, it's very important in the boardroom. I try to get more female representation at senior levels. That sometimes works, sometimes it hasn't worked. But
how do you deal with the authorities, and how do you deal with the, let's say, the industry, trade bodies, and everyone else where there's men? And logistics is not the most refined of industries.
Yeah.
Logistics is a maar dhad wali, sort of hardcore industry. So how
Faizan,
do you deal with that side of it?
Ultimately, I think, and this is why I think I was mentioning my own, what I think is my inner core competence, because I feel that ultimately people will gauge you, no matter which position that you are, whether you're male or female, but particularly, yes, for women in leadership positions, are you really qualified for the job? So I think the test that I put myself through is, if somebody, I need to prove my competence. I need to prove that I am genuinely qualified to be in this position, not just because I am my father's daughter, but I need to be, I need to make sure that I am truly capable of being in this position, right? So once you establish your core credibility, what I've noticed is, my experience has been, people do give you that respect. Yes, we're a predominantly patriarchal society, but people do, your viewpoint, your presence, your voice is very much respected. The issue is that what you come across is, where you don't as a woman have access, is that a lot of within the organization and outside, you have a lot of these boys clubs, networks. You as a woman, I as a woman cannot really infiltrate those. So, that's where I get restricted. In our model, because I have a brother, my brother Qasim works very closely with me. We're, fully aligned in terms of our how we see the key priorities of the business. It really helps to have, a male sibling who is able to access those spaces. So yes, one has to work around those problems. I think without his support, perhaps it would be a more isolating experience for me. But we supplement each other, complement each other very well. in terms of his ability to access, to penetrate, to really get that sort of, cohesion with these old, boys' networks, and me sort of being seen as a figurehead. So look, it's an ongoing challenge. I'm not undermining it, but on a day-to-day basis, it's not something that has proven to be, in my experience, a big obstacle either to my my daily functioning or my ability to lead. As a woman leader, I want to focus more on, do I have what it takes to actually lead? Do I have the strategic vision? Do I have the ability to motivate people? Do I have what is situational leadership, which is where you have to keep altering your model of leadership to, so those things. And again, women tend to be quite empathetic, great multitaskers, ability to get beyond the ego and have those conversations where you build consensus. But you also have to be assertive without being overly emotional. So yes, as a woman, you do have to navigate certain things, but one grows into the role, and it's an ongoing challenge and opportunity. I think Pakistan needs more women leaders. It's a small community at this point, but we try to sort of have conversations amongst each other and learn from each other as well.
So I'm gonna push a little bit more on this point around women. Let me give you some context. So most of the time in our society, especially in businesses that are dominated by men, right? There are examples, and you just showed me one, of a woman being the only woman in a room full of 20 men.
Yeah.
Right? The men can all operate, talk, and behave a certain way. And usually that behavior is checked by that one woman being in the room, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, most men are expecting the woman to act, behave, operate a certain way. Mm-hmm. In your case, the challenge is twofold, as I see it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. The first is, you're not the founder of your business. This is a business your father started. So if you're dealing with an authority, let's say the police or the anti-narcotics or whoever is the check post on various trucking routes or whatever, and you're dealing with a DG or you're dealing with your industry trade representative, first thing is they're like, this is the father's business, she's just a representative, ye kaun hai? Acha. Then add to that, you're a Western educated, trained individual, professional individual, who comes across with a certain level of competence, authority, and professionalism, which can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for?
Off-putting. Maybe.
Not off-putting, but a little authoritative and a little dominant, And that adds to the second part of it. So now that individual sitting across from you is already at a bit of a, okay, how do I counter this? I'm a little shaken up. Have you not experienced that?
Faizan, again, what I would first say to you is that from my internal perspective, when I view the world, the way I have been brought up, the sort of schooling, education, experiences that I have had are such that my being a woman has not been highlighted to me as the core element of my identity. So when I'm dealing with the world, I'm not first and foremost aware that I'm a woman and these are all men that I'm dealing with. It's very much at a human level. So that's my perspective. But you're absolutely right when you say that that is not necessarily what is being seen or heard on the other side. So they are absolutely, and by they, and I don't mean to undermine, and it's not, but there are biases that people have. We are, a largely patriarchal society. I work in a largely male-dominated industry. So to your point, they will look at me, and whether it's external stakeholders, whether it's employees, anybody really, the first question will be, why is she in this position? Is she here only because she's her father's daughter? So my counter to that is, I should establish my credibility. So the way that I conduct myself, I place a huge amount of emphasis on the substance of what I'm saying. And I want to conduct myself in a way that proves not just that I'm competent and that I'm qualified for the role. So that does place perhaps an additional onus on me. I can't just show up and expect to be taken seriously. I have to be, what I say has to be backed. There has to be, like I said, substance to that. And so that people say, okay, irrespective of the fact that she's a woman, what she's saying makes sense. I also have to play against the bias that I'm my father's daughter. And, now that plays both ways, because at one level, because my father, and I'm sure this holds true for a number of businesses, when the founder is respected, and his values and his competence, is established already. When you are in alignment with that, there is also a great comfort on the other side. Oh, she's very much an extension of that.
True.
So that becomes a source of comfort. That's a positive tick in your favor. But then the opposite tick is, why is she sitting here? Is it just because she was handpicked for the role? So again, I think the way I deal with this is this this desire almost to overcompensate. There cannot be a misstep. I shouldn't be seen to be making mistakes, because the minute I do that, I'm just there because I'm a Nepo baby, or I'm just there because, I just inherited this position. No, I want to prove to people that I'm here because I'm truly qualified for this position. And also, when you, as a woman, when the one thing that I am aware of, and this, by the way, is cross-cultural. This is not a Pakistan-specific thing. Even when I was a lawyer working in the UK, we had many women forums where we would discuss how does a woman conduct herself at the workplace. And, there have been numerous studies. When Hillary Clinton ran for president, this is something that was commented on. When a woman tries to become a man and becomes take masculine attributes, actually that can work against her in certain ways. Hillary Clinton was sometimes seen as being too wooden and too, whereas look at Kamala Harris, she allows herself to be sort of joyous and empathetic, and she'll cry and laugh, etc. But for women, that line between showing emotion and being assertive and more masculine is a very fine line, and you have to constantly be aware, is your tone of voice, if it's perceived as being overly emotional, everybody will just put you in that bucket. Oh, she's a woman. She's just, ironically, men tend to be, again, because of human nature, men and women both are emotion driven.
Right.
And so very often you're managing male emotions at the workplace as the mediator and the arbiter of, male emotion. But as a woman, your emotion has to be kept in check.
So exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah, it is. And there's a greater onus on you to prove yourself constantly, to be taken seriously.
So the woman leader of a global logistics player headquartered in Pakistan that is of $1 billion valuation has a nice ring to it.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Saira, thank you so much for the time. I loved this conversation. It's something that we've been trying to get on the cards for a while.
Yes.
I wish you all the success. I think what you guys are trying to do, especially, I love the points around sort of the ethos of a family business being about the founder. I share the same values, and I'm a believer that as a founder, your business should be an extension of you, because it is a reflection of you and the values you carry. And that it's a lot easier to get people to buy into that and work for that vision if they can actually see a visual representation of that in a human being.
Yes.
And I think that's something that I don't hear a lot about. When I talk to people in business, it's usually about returns and markets and opportunities and all of that. But I think this was very unique as a story, and I wish you all the best
Thank you,
on this journey.
Thank you. Really enjoyed speaking with you too.
Thank you. And stay tuned for more DigiTales episodes. Like, subscribe, comment. I read all your comments, and I bring guests based on the feedback you share. So keep them coming. Bye-bye.